Boa tarde.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to greet Member of European Parliament, Marie-Leitão Marques, who presided over the conference last year. She's with us today. I'd like to also greet the CEOs of the operators with us and apologize because I was up there waiting the Prime Minister, but there was a bit of a traffic jam despite the presence of the police, so the Prime Minister will take a few minutes. So in order not to be further delayed, we shall start this brief closing wrap-up ceremony, hoping that the Prime Minister will make it. I would first say that this has been by far the most complex conference to set up, because we've had many face-to-face conferences. APDC has celebrated 31 conferences in 38 years of activity, but we'd never had a conference that is simultaneously held online and face-to-face. All were face-to-face except the last one. The last one was practically only online, because we were still under certain safety measures because of COVID. And we could only have the speakers with us. In the meantime, it was like being in a TV studio, and the program streamed directly. But not this time. This time we had both realities simultaneously, the reality of being face-to-face and being online. And as we know, timing is critical when we address online reality. And in face-to-face reality, there's a little more room for maneuver. I dare say that this conference has been one of the most difficult ones to organize that we have had so far. But that's good, because it has put us to a test. And with the preliminary numbers we have, we can tell you that the audience for this conference is by far the largest that we've ever had. And we have to add a few more. We had to add up the 4 conferences that we had to make up for all the audience that we've had yesterday and today. We had 7,000 people participating at the conference, and for a professional conference such as ours, I don't know of other conferences. There may be such, but I don't know of none. Our aim was to have a sufficiently attractive program for the conference to be interesting to follow, not only from Portugal, but anywhere in the world. Therefore, apart from having international speakers of great relevance that have addressed the speakers in Portuguese and English, we also had simultaneous interpretation into English, so anybody could follow the entire conference in English. We also had sign language interpreting, and this meant that we had the opportunity to confirm, we'll see later on in the final figures, that we've had people following us in many countries of the world. And so the most complex conference to organize, and yet perhaps one of the most rewarding ones, if you allow me for the use of an English word, because we've had a wonderful result. I would like to greet the Prime Minister, now that the traffic jam has eased up and he could make it, and also the Secretary of State for Digital Transition, and also the President of the Congress, Paulo Portas. Since it was such a complex conference, I'd like to start by thanking the executive team of APDC, led by Sandra Almeida, for holding this fabulous event. A round of applause for our team, please. I always repeat what I said because the Prime Minister here. We've had 7,000 participants at this conference, and that includes the people here and the people who followed at a distance. If it weren't for the team and the sponsors, especially, that I'd like to also thank, we couldn't have held this meeting. I'd like to highlight one of the sponsors. They were all important, but we did not know how to make a TV program. When we decided to host this conference as a television format, we needed someone who knew how to go about it and how to manage a television program. So our great thanks to the Portuguese incumbent, RTP, for having continued the partnership that they had with us so many years. But especially in the last few years, with the transformations that we've had to make from a face-to-face conference to a conference that has become a sort of a TV program. Because we wanted the conference to have the dynamics of a television program and not just a sequence of webinars that could not engage people for 2 full days. So our great thanks to RTP, to the people at RTP, the journalists from RTP, Ms. Carolina Esteves, and to each and every one of the technicians from RTP. I'd like to also thank all the speakers. There were many. And also thank the fact that they also collaborated from a distance, sometimes, for this conference to have the success that we are enjoying. I'd like to also say another interesting thing for the industry and for the association. It's the fact that when the pandemic started, we quickly understood that it's not only our sector that is strategic for the maintenance of life in the country. One of the great differences between the pandemic that we're still living and suffering from and the one that happened 100 years ago is that this time we had telecoms to guarantee the continuity for businesses and of our lives. And APDC, in turn, had a program based on physical presence, based on events. So we had to totally change the program, not only turning the conference into a TV program, but also to prepare an interesting program. So what is the topic that the partners most value in this day and age? And that is talent. We need to attract more talent to the industry, and this requires the reskilling of people and attracting young people to the sector. And we've had the support of the government for that, and the endeavor of the institutions that have partnered with us and the further education institutions. So we launched the upskill program. And the upskill program has already trained last year almost 400 people, and this year they're training some 900 people. And we're definitely going to hold a 3rd edition and make it better to reach our goals. Upskill, we believe, is a success for the sector, and this translates into not only the success of our students and also all the companies that from last year to this one have doubled their requests for people trained by the upskill program. The entire program was designed, built, and launched during the pandemic. We've never had upskill before the pandemic. So it's possible to invent and also reinvent when the going gets really tough. So then the tough have to get really going. I won't sum up the conference, that would be too exhausting. All I'd say are a couple of things that I think are relevant for the conference. And first of all, I'd like to refer to the presentation by the President of the Republic, who is the follower of APDC.
highlighted the responsibility of our sector for the future, and he challenged us to make suggestions for the future of the country, telling us that the government would be very interested in these suggestions. I'm not going to make the summary of what the Prime Minister says, but he will be able to tell us. And so it was a very good start to our Congress, and it was a very good suggestion. Then we had the Mayor of Lisbon, who explained 50% of the global population live in cities who consume 70% of energy and they promote 80% of CO2 emissions. And so that is why these cities are instrumental to attain the different objectives in terms of energy efficiency and the productivity of companies and the launch of new company startups with a greater added value. But we had discussions on the quality of democracy, and so what was actually said by Daniele Nerati, for example, was that the critical topic for the protection of democracy is the protection of pluralism. The great threat to democracy is simplicity. And so the topic of disintermediation as a disintermediation between people and their representatives on the one hand, and between people and facts, is a potential threat to democracy, which has to be controlled. We had with us the former leader of MI6, Sir Alex Younger, and who recognised that we have a more connected technological world, that's more connected technologically. But we had metaverses, 5G. We discussed for the first time, I believe for the first time, the value chain of telecommunications from operators of the liabilities to the operators of the assets. And so we had a very detailed X-ray of the value chain of telecommunications. And we had a warning from those who is a specialist in digital transformation, Michael Wade, and he said that 87% of the digital transformation programs that he studied, 87% of these programs fail. And they fail for three reasons. The first, because they want to digitalize just for the sake of digitalizing. They have no quantitative objective defined from the start, which allows us to see whether the objective was actually met. Secondly, they think of disruptives and not disruption. It's not important to know who made the disruption. What is important to know is what disruption there was and how it's going to affect our business and how we can react. And finally, because the manages digital in silos, and with this this will not be a success. We also had the words from the Secretary of State's American President yesterday, who was in one of his public interventions, if I'm not mistaken, since he took power, and the responsible for Portugal Digital today, and explained the importance that digital has for the Portuguese economy and how it's going to be faced by the government. And this was reinforced this morning by the Minister of Economy. And we had a discussion today that was quite interesting, where Sérgio Rebelo, a famous Portuguese economist who is in the Kellogg University in the United States, and who said that there's an inversion of the globalization of products, or rather, there's an inversion of the globalization of products, but an increase in globalization of services. That's why we need more investment, not only but for the things we used to, but for new businesses, businesses that bring more services, more added value. And so what other speakers called global business service industry is the new alter ego of Portugal to attract service centres to Portugal to export to the world. That should be what Portugal is thinking of. We talked a lot about intermediation. We talked a lot about the new way of seeing capitalism. Paul Collier explained that capitalism lost the trust of the people, and the inequalities are taken advantage of by populist movements. And in the best organizations, they believed in the notion of a purpose with ethical principles, and normally these organizations are organizations that learn very quickly. I mean, the word ethics was suggested by our president of the Congress instead of moral, because people can have their own morals, and ethics is closer to justice. We talked a lot about talent. We said that there was a need for 150 million IT people in the world, and so initiatives like Upskill that Code is developing. On the way to solve these problems in Portugal, and so there's a retention of young people, and not enough is being used because they're not really well known by the companies. We have to use them better. We probably have to use them better. Stock options was a suggestion, but the others are suggestions that were not used. Journalism. We talked about journalism. Independent journalism is journalism regardless of the support used, and the way the news broadcast in the digital area changed journalism. The forces between journalism and digital platforms has changed, and so there is also some brands and up to certain points when the media brands they're selling directly to the consumers. And then we talked about the Minister of Infrastructure, talked about the white areas, and talked about the importance of underwater cables. It was also said in one of the discussions that there is not a European sovereignty strategy. So it's under construction because there's no European cloud provider, and this is a topic that Europe has to reflect upon. And so in addition to the slide that the President of our Congress showed, so that the 10 biggest technological companies in the world belong to countries outside Europe, and then we talked about the state of the nation of the media. It covered some of the countries, topics we've already discussed by CEO of the companies, and the state of the nation of telecommunications. I would just say that perhaps we could sum up the following way, and I hope that Portugal does not have a problem of coverage. Portugal, competitiveness of Portuguese companies does not depend on coverage, because our coverage is excellent. In the European indicators, Portugal is well classified exactly for this issue. We have a problem of white areas. Our total coverage, our global, is 92%. We have a problem. That is the white areas, and not a problem of competitiveness, but of equality. And that is why it makes sense to use public investment to cover these white areas. But this cannot be the focus of the productivity of the country, because the focus of the productivity of the country is that the networks we have are not used as they should be by individuals for reasons of digital illiteracy. The same goes for companies, and because of the lack of killer applications that entrepreneurship. I remember in 2002, the Prime Minister said that the electronic invoice should be a priority, and with 2022, and that type of killer application is a priority for the digital literacy of companies and the more fluid business environment. Finally, Portugal is going to try and recover its 5G delay, and this will be done essentially if there is legislation which promotes and encourages competitiveness and the incentive of operators' investment. Competition is this. We have 3 operators in Portugal. In Europe, there are about 4 million users for each operator on average, and in the United States 100 million, and China 400 million. And so Portugal is doing well from that point of view. We've always had sophisticated services. I remember when we used to be able to put the program back on the television. Practically no country had this service. We can't look backward in terms of investment. We must look forward. So that's the main structural question that appeared here today in our debate. So these are basically some of the ideas that I can't really call it summary. These are just some ideas that we saw, because this was done on the top of my knee. I think that the challenge of having a hybrid conference was an advantage for everybody. I would once again like to thank the President of our Congress for his absolutely indispensable help. And now I'd like to give the floor to the Prime Minister. Thank you very much.